What's going on, guys? I've got my MD 180 drive with the kick-up fins halfway torn apart here. The reason for that is I'm going to be doing a repair on it that's going to give us a little bit more longevity on the drive without having to forego the cost of a new spline. So you may recall one of my previous videos here recently, I ran into some trouble out on the water. Didn't have a total failure, but this middle cam section was canted up real bad. It detented. The bearings failed on me when I was out on the water. So we're going to get into a little repair here that maybe will help you guys out. I apologize to some of my viewers that may not be kayak fishermen or especially Hobie users, but if you do use the Hobie Mirage drive, this may be something that can help you out. Let's get into it. The tools you're going to need to do this repair are going to be a 7/16 inch wrench, a number 2 to number 3 size Phillips head screwdriver, a Dremel, and some sort of grease compound. So the way these Mirage drives are set up, you apply pressure through the pedals and a pumping action down through the cams, and as they pivot back and forth, it applies pressure to these chains on these gears, and it makes your fins move. The problem you run into is the rear section is always under the most pressure. There's an idler cable up front that's supposed to balance the pressure between either side, and it does a pretty good job, but inevitably you're going to get some wear on these bearings. Typically you don't need to do a complete disassembly of the drive to get to the problem. Usually the problem's in one section or another. For mine, it's going to be in this rear section, which I've already disassembled halfway so I could diagnose the problem. But there's a 7/16 inch nut that sits right on this cable. You remove that nut and you can pull this cable off the cam, and you just kind of set it off to the side. Then there's these screws. There's 2 on the top, 1 on either side, and there's 1 that goes up through the bottom right here. Once you remove that, that's where we're at, and then all the bearings will fall out. There's 3 sections that use these larger style bearings. Here, here, and here. There's 15 in each section. So the part number for these bearings is 81471, but they're almost impossible to find. I called several manufacturers and everyone was out of stock. I think Hobie stopped manufacturing them for the most part. They used to manufacture them and they were easy to get, and you could service your drive and bring it back to life, but now you're almost forced to buy a new spline. Fortunately, I found 8 brand new ones from Fin Factory in San Antonio, and I had a buddy with a broken drive. He warranted it early, so a lot of his bearings were still fresh, and he was able to send me some out, so I reused his bearings to service my drive, so that worked out pretty well. I considered having some made by a 3D printer shop, but I don't think normal plastic would hold up. These are some sort of polymer graphite material. They do last a decent amount of time, but inevitably they will wear out on you. So you can see the difference in the new one and the old one. When they're brand new, they should be a 1/4 inch in diameter, and there's probably 1/3 of that material missing on the old used ones. Just for comparison's sake, I've got some digital calipers here. That's 0.21 on the one that's used. Take a brand new one, 0.25. So it's a significant decrease in material that rubs off, and you've got 15 of these in a radius, so that's quite a bit of material if you calculate them all working together. Alright, so you might be wondering what the reason for the Dremel is. Well, it's almost a 2-part problem. If I was just to put the brand new bearings in here, they would wear out pretty fast, because this insert that holds the bearings, it starts to create a little bit of a lip, and there's a raised edge right here that we're going to radius off and clean up, and then we'll put the bearings back in. So it should be essentially pretty close to how it is new. Just as a side note, if this is something you don't feel comfortable doing, or you're worried about it voiding your warranty, I definitely wouldn't advise it. This spline for me is already outside of its warranty, and I'm confident that this will give me some more longevity in the drive. I've been in other Hobie shops, and this is a procedure that they perform pretty regular while they're waiting on new drives to come in. to give the consumer a little more service life. So let's get into it. One thing you definitely need to pay attention of is to maintain a flat surface. You don't want to have an angle on your Dremel, you'll just make the problem worse. And you don't want to have it the other way, or you'll just create the opposite of a lip and the bearings will want to slide off. So you'll want to make it as flat as possible when you go to clean that lip. Alright, so I've got that cleaned up nice. There's no burrs, no edges. I am going to take a polishing wheel and clean up this surface just to smooth it out, so I have a nice smooth surface for those bearings to ride on. Alright, that's going to do it. We've got that lip removed. We cleaned the surface up. We've got a nice smooth surface for those bearings to ride on. Let's get the bearings installed and get it put back together. If you're wondering what the grease is for, we're going to take a light coat of grease and put it on the inside of this cavity so it holds the bearing when we try to reassemble it. If you try to do it without grease or some sort of sticky compound, the bearings go everywhere and it's a nightmare. So this is one of the easier ways to do it. Take a Q-tip and spread that around a little bit. Alright, the middle section's back together. I use this just as a holding block to kind of keep some pressure on this. If you don't keep pressure on it, it'll back off and all your bearings will fall out. But we got that back together. We're going to start working on this back section, and then we should have this thing back up and running. Make sure you count out exactly 15 before you try to put them in here, because there is a small gap, and I always question, do I have the right amount? Because there's a little bit of a gap in between the bearings. You might second guess yourself, so make sure you count them out before you start putting them in here. Should have exactly 15. This back section's a little easier because you can just put them in the end cap and then slide it on. There's a small plastic washer that goes over these bearings to hold them in place. Make sure you remember to put that back on or your bearings will fall out. There's going to be a rough side and a smooth side. Both sides start out smooth when they're new, but the rough side needs to face the chain. It's got that rough texture because the chain sometimes rubs on it. You're going to want the smooth side against the bearings. All right, we're ready to put it back on. Make sure you have your screwdriver and your screw ready to go, because you're going to have to hold everything together. Boom. All right, now I'm putting pressure on this thing so everything is held back together. It's like a whole new drive. You can see how flush and how smooth it is. I mean, it was completely jammed up. It had a good 30-degree angle in here. Now it's functioning nice and smooth. So we're going to get the chain back on and get this thing back in full operation. Want to make sure you have even tension on both sides. You don't want your rear cables very tight. So like I said, the rear cables do have the most stress. The most stress in your drive is going to take place, these back cables. But that looks good. Smooth operation. And with that, the repair is complete. We're back up and running. Not quite as good as a brand new spline, but pretty close. And it didn't cost us $400 in parts to complete. Inevitably, these bearings do wear out. I do have some on hand, so that's good for the next time I need it. But if you're a moderate to heavy user like I am, this is eventually probably going to happen to your 180 drive. So feel free to use this to help increase the longevity of your drive. Hopefully you won't have to forego the cost of a spline right out of the gate. If this helps you out, leave a comment, let me know, and hopefully we'll see you back out on the water soon. Thanks for watching.